Hello, my name is Dan Humberg. I represent HarvestFires.com. This is an instructional video to help with the installation of the tin kit for a Firestop system. This particular one is on a Case model 7120 combine. Before we begin the discussion of the actual installation, I always give this cautionary statement. The Firestop kit is designed to stop the ignition of organic dusts, particularly volatile dusts like sunflowers, at the exhaust system, the hottest parts of the exhaust system, and it's very effective at doing that, and it will dramatically reduce the number of smolders that you generally find on the combine. However, I have to caution you that I cannot guarantee that you'll never have a fire or a smolder on your combine. There are too many other potential ignition sources beyond the exhaust system. You can have a hot bearing, you can have an electrical short, you can have an alternator fail. There are questions about static electricity. I don't find that to be much of a problem on this model machine, but anyway, there are potential sources of ignition that you need to be aware of, so you still need to be vigilant. But having said that, this kit should dramatically reduce the incidence of fire and hopefully reduce the risk to something similar to what you find in wheat or soybeans or corn or some other crop. So we'll begin the instructions on how to install this tin kit. I'm on a 7120 model combine on a dealer lot. I'm not sure what the year is on this combine. Maybe I can figure that out in just a minute. It's like the engine was built in 2010, so I think this is a 2010 year 7120. There are variations between machines. I see some things on one machine that I don't see on the next machine of the same model, so there probably are variations from year to year, and you may encounter something that's slightly different than what I'm seeing, but hopefully what you see is similar enough that this video will help you with the process of getting that tin installed. I want to point out a couple things before we even begin with the tin that you have to do in order to be able to access the engine to put the tin on. I've already taken these off of this combine in order to speed up this process. There's a large piece of sheet metal up here I've got laid on top. That piece bolts right behind this, or onto this bar between the two engine hatches here. This one had 3 bolts holding it on, one here, one over to the left, and one down here on the radiator shroud, on the angled part of the radiator shroud. You need to take that piece of tin off, and if you're putting the Firestop kit on, you probably will not put that piece of tin back on. In fact, it would probably interfere with the tin work on here. So you can probably just leave that piece off if you're installing this Firestop kit. Now, I'm on a dealer lot and I don't own this machine, and they're letting me use it as a demonstration. So I will have to put that piece of shielding back on when I take the kit back off of here. But you would take that piece off and probably just leave it off. You might want to hang on to it in case you move the machine someday and you can sell it back with the machine, but that has to come off. In order to get that off, you need to drop this coolant overflow line out of this rubber grommet that holds it here, the lower one. This one goes through a slot in that shield, and I don't think you can get the shield off without dropping this line down. At least I've not been able to on other machines, and so I just took it off on this one. You loosen this bolt up substantially and then split the grommet apart. It'll be a little sticky, but it'll come apart. And there's another grommet over behind the muffler over here, behind the overflow tank. You need to loosen this one up as well and drop that tube out of the lower part of it down here, and then that tube will kind of drop down out of the way, and then you can lift that shield up out of there and then put these back in place. Again, I'm going to leave them loose because I have to put the shield back in before I'm done, but you would put these back in and tighten the grommets back up to hold them securely so that they don't get in trouble. So we had to do that to this machine. A second thing that I found on this one that I did not see on the machine that I developed the tin from on this same lot, but a different 7120, is this shield. This one was bolted just above the left end of the exhaust manifold. There are 2 bolts in the head here, 2 bolt holes in the head. We're actually going to use one or more of those bolt holes to hold our tin on as well. It can do serve both functions. But that piece that they had on here, I think, is a heat shield. It's there to shield this black rubber airline from your compressor The compressor's right here on the side of the turbo, and so that's compressed air leaving that line and going to probably the intercooler. Anyway, that shield sticks down in where my glove is, down in here, sticks down in between the exhaust manifold and this black rubber line, and I think it just shields it from radiated heat so it doesn't overheat that rubber tube. There's just two 8mm bolts, 13mm sockets that hold that, or 13mm hex heads that hold it onto that above the block, and you'll need to take that off if you're putting the tin on, because first of all, it's in the way and we can't fit around it, and second of all, once we have the tin on, heat for this black tube will not be an issue anymore. So if you have that shield on there, pull it off. 2 bolts. The other thing I had to do here is I'm looking at the right hand end of the exhaust manifold, and you'll notice these 2 clamps on this expansion bellows. That's an expansion joint that allows the the great temperature difference to go from cold to hot. That exhaust manifold is going to expand, and so that gives it some flexibility. So there's a pair of clamps there. On this side, you just leave them alone, I think. We'll find out if we have to move them or not, but I'm not sure that we'll need to. If necessary, we can later. But on the 2 here behind the compressor have to be turned and spun under, because we've got a narrow space here to go in with our tin as to fit down in between the exhaust manifold and that compressor turbine. So what you do is you take a 5mm Allen wrench, stick it in the top of these screws, back them off. I backed them off 3 turns was sufficient. I think I backed them off 4 and then turned them back in 1, and then tap them if necessary. Tap on the clamp with a ball peen hammer or mallet or something like that, and it'll come loose, and you can either tap it around or swing it around with your fingers. Generally, you probably got to tap on the Allen head a little bit. Then it'll drive it around so that screw, the bolt or the Allen bolt that's tightening it, is underneath and on the bottom and pointed back towards the block. It'll work just fine that way. It'll do the same thing it's supposed to do here. It's just the easiest way for them to install it is with them pointed straight down. We're just going to swing it around about 90 degrees so it's underneath, and then tighten them both back up. Make sure you get them snug. I tried to count turns when I loosened them and give it similar plus a little bit when I tightened it back up. So those are pointed horizontal underneath and pointed underneath there, and they should be out of the way. It's possible we may need to do these on the right hand side as well if we don't have enough clearance for our tin kit to come all the way around this. If it bumps into that, I'll swing them around underneath as well. Those are a little easier to reach than the ones back over here. So that's the preparation before we start doing the tin. Once you got those things taken care of, then we can begin with trying to fit the tin around the exhaust manifold and around this exhaust turbine here. So I'll break video here now and then get started with that tin work in a minute. I'm looking at the first parts that I've installed for this kit on the 7120. We're looking underneath the left end of the manifold. I've got a camera in my hand, and I've got a piece of tin. I'm going to first look up from the bottom here. There, you're looking at the piece number 2 from the bottom. I've slipped it in underneath the manifold. I'll come around on top of it here best I can. And if you look in there, right in the center of your field of view right now, I'm sorry I can't get much light to this. There, that's a little better. There's a tab there, and I have a button head cap screw. It's a 10mm Allen screw with a button type head that's through the flange and into the block. And I'm going to tell you now, before you ever start this, you need to get an air compressor gun in there, and you've got to clean out that hole. It's in between the first 2 exhaust ports, and it's unused. It's not used by anything else on the engine, but that means it's full of both paint and dirt, and you can't get that screw or that bolt to thread in very easily at all without cleaning it out thoroughly, and then lubricate it, oil it. And then I'm using the shortest button head cap screw I could buy, which is about
I think it's 16 millimeters long, or the threaded portion is 16 millimeters long, and that's probably a little bit on the long side. You should probably shorten that bolt by at least a quarter of it, maybe even half of it. It threads in hard, and I can't get it all the way in right now. Now that'll be okay for this temporary install, and it probably would work on yours too. It doesn't necessarily have to be pulled up real tight, but you want it to restrict the movement of this piece. So shorten that a little bit, clean out the hole and lubricate it. Test fit the bolt before you try and put the tin on. It takes, I think, a 6 millimeter Allen wrench to drive it in. And then once you know that the bolt will fit, you can put that piece of tin, slip the tin up in place, start the bolt through that tab, and don't bring it up tight yet because we may have to shift it a little bit. But you can hold that piece in place with that one bolt. Now I'm going to move over to the other side. I'm underneath the right side manifold. I'll look underneath first. I guess that doesn't help a whole lot. That's the matching piece on the right hand side underneath the manifold. This one has flanges on it, so I can't see over the top of it as easily. Again, I'm looking under the right hand end of the manifold, and you can see that tab that's bent upward, and there's a button head cap screw there that's through the slot in that tab. Goes into a open hole between the first two exhaust ports into the block. And again, you need to clean that hole out before you ever put the bolt in. Then shorten the bolts by probably at least a third, the threaded portion by a third, and chase the threads in there using the bolt to make sure that you can thread it in. And then you can slip this piece in place. I'm going to come underneath and see if you can see that. I'll shine a light up there if I can. Okay, you're looking up at the bottom of these two pieces. You'll notice that the one coming in from the left is underneath the one coming in from the right. And so they overlap, and that little junction will shed dust because the fan can't blow dust in between those two pieces then. And I have put a screw in the back hole. I had pre-threaded that when I assembled it on the bench, and now I could lift that piece up and thread the screw in a little bit by hand, or most of the way in by hand, and then I use that little stubby screwdriver to pull it up tight. You don't want to put the outer screw, the one closest to you here, in, because there's going to be a piece that will overlap that, and we'll put that screw in later if we're able to. So those are the first two pieces to go in. They should lie underneath the manifold from one end to the other. Alright, we're looking at the left side of the manifold again. We had put the bottom pieces across in place, and now I'm looking at the kind of outer box that goes around the manifold, and that will slip down from on top above there and rest on the lower piece. And I've done that here, set it down on there, and put two or three screws up from the bottom into the flange on that front piece, or that box piece. It wraps around the end. I can see we're going to have a little bit of a challenge here in the upper left corner. It looks like the design is not quite deep enough to completely wrap around the manifold. I don't quite know why that is, but I'll look into it in fixing future kits. This one I think we can make work, but it's going to be a bit of a patch around here. So I pulled it up as tight as I can and had to bend that flange up a little bit, and we'll have to kind of patch that with some of that aluminum foil tape when we get there, because I don't think it's going to screw down flat. But we'll make it work. At least I think so. The right hand end of it, or the inner end of it, will come just about flush with the face of the compressor. I'm looking right across the face of that compressor. It's actually the clamp that holds it onto the cast iron part of the turbocharger there. But the next piece of tin will come right across that face, and then attached with those two screw holes that you can see there to the piece across that piece we just dropped in place behind the manifold. So I'm going to set you aside for just a minute, and then I'll put that other piece in place here and we'll look at how that goes. Okay, I'm looking at piece number 6 here. I don't know how clearly you can see that. I want to get it where you can look at it. It had an initial cut there that was designed to fit over this turbo bearing, which is kind of a complex shape. It's got some round and some square and whatever. I don't know how they decided how to make that shape, but I tried to design to go around it, but there's a couple places where we've got interference. Let's see if I can set this on something so you can see it. Okay, I ended up cutting this back piece. This line is still the original line, but then I cut up in here probably another 5/8 of an inch or so and extended this up above a little bit higher, probably a 1/2 inch higher than it had been, and came down and made this cut forward around here, probably another 3/8 inch at the right hand edge down here. Extended that out so you can test fit it and trim it to where it'll go in place. It doesn't matter if we have a little bit of a gap around there, because it tends to seal up against that clamp around higher up anyway, but I'd still like it to fit as reasonably well there. But you need to have enough room that we can shift it a little bit. So now that I've cut that out, I will slip it in place here. We come down from on top behind the clamp that's down in there, that bolt that holds that clamp tight, slips in against the face of the compressor down to the bearing, and then there's a hole that lines up here, and I'll go offline and shoot 2 screws through those 2 holes that we can reach there, and it'll tie these parts together. Then we'll come back and talk about the bottom piece that comes up underneath. You're looking at piece number 7. This is the bottom of the divider between the compressor turbine and the exhaust turbine. It goes in place kind of like, well, I don't know, it goes in place with the that cutout for the oil line in the forward position closer to the block. I didn't have to trim out anything around in the interior of this piece. What I did have to do is open up the gap in that flange for the return oil line. And you can test fit it and trim that out as much as you need to fit around that. It's a pretty big line on this one, and it was a little farther to the rear than the design estimated, and so I had to trim mostly to the rear, but I trimmed both directions a little bit in that to open up that gap in the flange. Once we have that trimmed so it'll fit, I can slide it up from underneath. It has to go behind the pressured oil line and fit around the return oil line. But when we do that, we get it in place here. I don't know if you can see that clearly or not. I look underneath the turbocharger and look up. It's pretty hard to see. If I look down, I can raise this piece up in place until the holes, boy, that's hard to see, I'm sorry, just impossible to get in there to show you that. There you can see a little bit, you can see those two holes, and they will line up with the holes in the top piece, and I can shoot a screw through probably both of those using a long driver bit. I used that long driver bit back here to get those 2 screws through this top piece into that face flange or face over the manifold as well. Now here in the back, I'll come across to the right of the turbocharger and reach in there with the screwdriver and get these 2 screws in there. You can see maybe you can see that red mark that lines up to tell me I'm lined up. On the inside as well, there are 2 screws in there. I know I can't get down in there to really show you that. Maybe we can look up from inside here. I'm looking across behind as soon as I let go, it's going to drop. I just don't have any light there for you. There, you're looking up at those red hash marks, and as I get this piece up in place there, those hash marks will line up, and then when they line up we can get the screws through in the forward part of that, again shooting them in with a long driver bit underneath the neck of the turbocharger crossways, and that'll hold those two pieces together. Now I'm going to go offline to do that because there's no way for me to show it to you while I do it. Okay, I'm trying to shine a light down in there. I'm right here. You can see a screw head down in there. That's right forward of the oil line coming up here. You can see this oil line right below us here. And that screw down in there crossways is connecting those two pieces together. You can actually see the threads coming through on the far side here. You can't see crap. There, now I turn the camera sideways, now I can see that screw poking through there. And on this side, I look forward down in there, I can't get the light and the camera in there at the same time. There you can see that screw crossways behind this is the turbocharger compressor here, or exhaust turbine here. I reached underneath there with the long bit, and there's a second hole there that I can probably get as well. This was the higher one. I think the lower one I can reach as well. I'll put one of them in for my temporary install, but you should try to get both of those in if you're able to. Now we'll go on to the right hand side of the manifold and the right hand side of the turbocharger. I'm looking down at the right hand side of the manifold. I've got this piece put on. I put it on just with 3 screws right now. It screws on easily to the flange that's underneath the manifold. I noticed at the right hand end, again, it's not quite deep enough. It's going to run into we're going to have a little conflict when we put the top on there. We'll tape over that and fix that. This piece goes on relatively easily. Once we have that piece on, I want to try and put on the top right hand side of the turbocharger cover. There, you're looking down at the right hand side of the turbocharger, and I'm going to try and put that top piece on now. This is what it looks like. It's piece number 8, it looks like. Okay, I can see that we're going to have to cut up above the exhaust pipe to be able to drop this part down, because it doesn't, well, maybe it'll work with the other one, I'm not sure. I think I'm going to drop it down some so that we have some flexibility with how we line up with this other piece over on the other side. Those two have to be parallel to each other for the wrap to go around this. So I'm going to cut probably up, take this piece out here and give myself another 3/8 of an inch up and maybe just a hair on this side. So I'll probably chop it right here and do about like this, so that we have a little more flexibility there. Okay, I've got this piece for the upper part of the right side of the turbo, and I've cut a little bit out here, about I think 3/8 of an inch over the top of this, and I'm going to see if I can make that fit on here now. I'm going to take a little bit more out of here, move it forward a little bit so that I got a little more play there. Okay, we try again. I think that looks like it might work. I've got my long driver bit, and I'm going to try and squirt this one on here. Okay, that one didn't bite because it's got two pilot holes are the large size. There's going to be a flange on the top piece that comes down there that'll bite into. We'll get the center one here and the bottom one. And that one's running into a flange on the... That one's running into a part of the casting of the exhaust manifold. I'm going down underneath and see if I can get the bottom one. Okay, so we got that one, and the top one will work when we put the top on this box, which we could probably do pretty soon. I'm going to try and put the bottom piece on under here. This is that bottom piece. Unbelievably, it appears that one thing is actually going to go easy. This actually is going to fit without any adjusting. I'll bring you down here and let you look at it. See that fitting down around the bottom of the manifold or the exhaust pipe, and the screw holes up there will line up. You can see this, my hash marks there to help know that we're lined up. And this one up here on the back side will line up as well. So I'm going to screw that piece on. I'll take you offline to do that. And I'll put that piece on, and then we can worry about the top piece and the wrap around the turbo. I've got a combine running in the background, so if you can't hear it, I'm sorry, but got a little competition going, I guess. We're looking at part number 10. It's the bottom of the turbo cover. On the machine that I measured, the turbo oil supply line came through up here where my finger is, and so there's a provision made for that in this thing. On this particular machine, they used a different design, and they went down and then laterally across this way. And so that oil line exits at an angle through here about the direction my finger's pointed. And so I had to cut an opening in here. Fortunately, it's possible to slip the piece in place. I've bent all of the tin around the edge outward away so that I have smooth faces here. So it's a soft line, it's a rubber line that's going through there. I want to make sure that if there's any contact here, it's gentle contact with that hose. I've also enlarged the oil return line by bending these. I cut these fingers a little bit deeper off of this here around this side, and then bent those fingers down so that they parallel that oil line as well. And now we can slip that piece in place. If I was putting this kit on for good, I would take some aluminum foil tape and I would cover over this opening here, because that one will not be utilized. I've also trimmed this piece out here to fit around, to fit up underneath this turbocharger geometry actuator. So this will fit up from the bottom, and then we'll have another piece come down from above. So I'm going to turn you offline. I'll put this piece in place, and then I'll turn you back on and show it to you from underneath. Okay, I want to look underneath this turbocharger. You can see the oil return line coming through here. There's the oil supply line going through the back of the box, entering there. If we look up underneath here, I don't know if we can see much. There we can see I've got two screws in that enter the panels on the bottom of the manifold. There's a third screw hole there that I haven't put a screw in yet, but you can probably reach that center one. and that'll tie both left panel, right panel, and the bottom of the turbo panel all together. That's a 3-layer one there in the middle. So that's that piece. Then we wrap around out here, and we've made a cut underneath this turbocharger geometry actuator, and I've just put a few screws in here to hold it in place for now, but you could wrap around now and put all those screws in place and tie it on good. So that's the way that's going to fit. Now the next piece we'll put on is the back top above the manifold, and then we'll put this piece over top of the turbo here. Alright, I put this top piece in place here. This piece in place here, I had to pull this side out to drop the flange down in there, but once we get it in there, it fits pretty snug, but it fits. And the screw holes seem to line up mostly. And so now we could go shoot screws in through here and tie that on. I'll put on a couple there. And then on the other end we'd shoot screws in. On the other end we would shoot the screws in from the top. Again, you may have to force it a little bit to make them line up. That screw hole at the end you probably won't be able to do because it won't line up, and there's a manifold right under there anyway. On this end, I did note that on the bottom in here, let's see if I can get to where you see that. There, you see that screw hole in the center frame there. That one, you can't put a screw in there because it's going to run into, I think it's the exhaust manifold itself. Anyway, it'll start to distort things if you put that one in. So just leave that one out. It'll be okay without it. We can run a little tape over there anyway. So that's the top piece. I'm going to put a couple screws in place, and then we'll fit this piece above the manifold. Alright, I put the cover on over the top of the turbocharger. I had to fit it back here. So we cut a notch here. I probably could have cut this notch about straight down here and covered that up a little bit. I'll make a note that to essentially not trim as much out here as we did on this particular one. That could be covered over with a little bit of that aluminum tape at this point. It doesn't matter if it leaks a little bit there anyway. So we fit around that actuator okay from above and from below. And then once you get that to fit, you can just shoot screws through. I've done about every other one here and follow this up around to the top. I did find that when I got this here, this screw hole wouldn't line up with the underneath, and because I think that this manifold piece is probably just torqued or shifted just a little bit. In this case, I just chose to shoot screws through where they were. Anyway, they're self-drilling, self-tapping screws. So now we've got the turbo covered. Now the only thing we have left to do, or the part that we have left to do, is to cover this exhaust pipe up here towards the muffler. So I'll see if I can't figure out which piece should go on there first, and maybe a shortcut to doing some of that. We'll come back and see if we can't fit those pieces on, and that'll be the last part of this tin setup. Okay, we are looking down on the exhaust pipe cover area here, and I've got pieces. I'm not sure what the numbers are. This one's 14 on top, but there's a piece on the inside here closer to the manifold, and then there's the piece on the outside here, comes up just inside this coolant thing. I actually was able to leave those three assembled together and slide them down from above, slip them down over the top of this and screw on. I've just put in a couple screws on each flange here, but I was able to put that all in place as a unit, and so you don't have to take the whole thing apart and put it in piece by piece. You can drop those three in all as a block and screw them onto this face, and of course you'll screw them all the screws on. Then the piece on the bottom, you can slip up. It's a little tricky to get it in place, but you can find it, slip it underneath there. I did have to notch the end of it here, this upper end of it that goes out on the far outer end, notch it out about 1/4 inch deep most of the way across here, because it runs into this it comes up against that bracket, that support bracket, right underneath those two bolts right there is where it comes up and hits. And so I had to notch it back or cut it back just a little bit so that it fits on the inside of that. The other piece should take off from the other side of that and go up. So you can slip this one in place on the bottom and then put your screw holes or screws in all along the bottom here. And on the opposite side, they'll actually go through. I don't know if I can get up into there so you can see it. But there's a flange on the bottom, so the screws go straight up on the back side, on the other side. So we'll put that piece in place. That leaves the upper section to cover the upper part of the exhaust pipe there, up to the muffler, and that's comprised of parts 16, 19, 18, and I'm guessing maybe 17 is the bottom. I've taken the bottom out, and I believe that we can put this piece in as a chunk. So I'm going to slide that up like this. There we go. And we can actually slip it in just like that and put some screws in or hold that in, and then the last piece to go in is going to be that piece that fills in the bottom underneath that pipe. So I'll go offline and put a few screws in here, maybe put those pieces in, and then come back and show you that when we're done. Notice that we're pretty close up against the muffler here, but we've got gaps on the side where we can dump out the remaining air that's flowing up along that box. Alright, we were able to put the box around this exhaust pipe, fit the piece in underneath. I'm still up against this bracket, that support bracket, and when I take this apart, I'm going to trim just a little bit more here because I'm having trouble with that. It still wants to bump on this a little bit, so I'll cut it back or cut it a little wider here. But then we could put the last piece in up underneath here that runs all the way up to close to the muffler. We don't quite get to the muffler up there, but it runs up close to it, and that piece fits in. There is I haven't put all of the screws in on the back side over here where my fingers are poking down. It wants to pull to one side a little bit, so I may have to, that may be fixed when I work on this bracket a little bit back here, but then we can push it off to one side and get those screws to start from the other side in here and pull this together. I won't do that now because I'm going to take this back off before it gets dark here. But that's the last step, is to tighten this up, pull those last screws together. You can put screws in from the bottom on this and pull that together, but they come from this side back here. Get you right side up, that'll help. There we go. So this is from the engine side looking at that, and I don't have the screws in down here yet. I'd have to pinch that in and find those screw holes and get them in, and you have to do that with some of that you could do with a drill driver back there, but it may be a little trickier to get that to pull together. But anyway, that's the last part of it, is to fit that box around there and get that put on. Otherwise, let's do a little walk around here. This is the view from above the hole here a little bit. Outside the turbo, and that, like a little gap there that I'd like to close up around that, otherwise it fits pretty good around that actuator. There's a hole here where our air entry comes in. If you haven't watched it already, there's a little bit of a video about how to do that. Essentially, you have a stub entry galvanized fitting for like a heating, ventilation, air conditioning fitting that'll go in there. I usually bend 4 tabs on the base of that out, and then the rest of the tabs go in through the hole, and you reach in through the fitting and bend them out flush with the inside so that it can't come off. And then I'll shoot screws through those 4 tabs to lock it down to the outside, and then I use that aluminum foil tape to tighten up that, or to seal that up on their way in with that air. I don't put that tape on until after we put on the next fitting. The next one outside that is a heating, ventilation, air conditioning, it's called a swivel 90. It's a piece, that galvanized piece where you can swivel the sections to go anywhere from straight ahead to over 90 degrees. And then that will come up and get us close to the top of the exhaust or the valve cover here, and then we'll put a rubber 90 on this on the end of that and shoot over the top of the valve cover here. I think we may be able to go inside these lines here with that, because there's maybe enough space for that, these coolant lines. And then you can swivel that galvanized fitting around to get wherever you need to be, and make sure that you can head out with that rubber 90 out over the valve cover. And this one, I don't know if this is an early one, but we've got the oil fillers down at this end, which is nice because it clears the center of the valve cover for us here. On the bigger engines, we got the valve, or the oil fill cap is right in front of us here, and so we have to go around that. But you'll come up out of this hole with the galvanized fitting switched to a rubber 90. You'll seal that rubber, or that galvanized fitting. Once you have it aimed the direction you want and everything's good, then we seal that up with some of that aluminum foil tape. I cover the whole thing wrap it with aluminum foil tape, and it locks that thing and makes it a rigid piece then. And I shoot some screws through the base of the collar, or that fitting into the collar that's around here to lock it together. And I shoot a couple screws through the rubber fitting into the galvanized fitting up at this height to lock those together, and then run tape over the top of that joint as well. But that'll shoot out underneath, probably underneath, or either that or above or behind, I don't know, these coolant lines, and out over the valve cover, and then we can go out there and get routed the rest of the way to our blower for the clean air. So I want to look at a couple other things on this end of this. I'm not real happy with the way this fit on this end. This is the top, and I got the piece underneath, and they did not close up real tight. I guess it can be a little better than it is, and we could probably shoot a screw through this one. I'm not sure we can get a screw through that one at all. We could shoot a screw through this one and tie that down a little bit, and then just wrap this end with tape. I don't like a gap here because I don't want it to shoot dust from the radiator fan, which is right under there. We don't want that blowing dust back into this in any way. So we'll seal this up as best we can by screwing it down, and then I would cover this end of the joint with aluminum tape. The last thing that I have not done here yet that we should do, you would have to do, is to put a bolt in probably this fitting just to the left of the entry hole here. That would be an 8mm bolt. That'll tie the top of this piece tightly to the block there. It looks to me like it wants to lift up just a little bit, and then that 8mm bolt will go in there. And then the next one over, you could do the same thing. There's another one here that will line up. That's also an 8mm threaded hole in the block, or the head. The next one over, I thought they were all 8mm. Actually, that one down near that end is actually a 10mm hole, and you could put a 10mm bolt in there. It needs to be an extremely short bolt, about 3/8 of an inch. It's really all you want for threads on that. But you could put that in there and pull that one up. It's not really necessary. This thing isn't going anywhere. If you got two bolts in the middle here, she's probably not going to, I mean, it's already, you can't move the thing because it's so tightly wound around the stuff that it's fitting around. But those bolts will just prevent any movement of it at all. So I think the two in the middle is probably sufficient, but if you really like to have things tight, you might come down to this end and put a 10mm one in that end as well. Okay, anything else here? I don't think there's a lot else that I can tell you about this one. This is the first fit of this design, and so there's always changes to be made, and I will take the cuts that I made on this one and try to incorporate them into the design so that the next versions of this cut will fit a little bit better. But actually this didn't go together all that bad. I was pleased with the way that it went on. So that's the kit for a 7120, for the Firestop kit, the tin work. You will have to do some custom adjusting where it goes around things, and it's pretty hard to tell where they're going to run that pressure line for the turbocharger bearing. The way that they ran it on this one actually worked pretty well. I wish they'd do that on the others too, but they didn't. So that's the end of a wrap on the installation for a 7120. So I hope you have a safe harvest and a productive one.